Donald Trump and his team have just released a fascinating document looking at where the security challenges are around the world as far as they see them. Now, when Anthony Albanese finally did meet US President Donald Trump in Washington a month and a half ago now, Trump didn't push him at all on increasing defence spending. He said, Australia can only do so much. But now the US has released its national security strategy and the pressure is right back on us. Joining me is the country's top foreign affairs writer, Greg Sheridan of The Australian. Greg, suddenly it does matter that we don't spend enough on defence.
Yes, Andrew, great to be with you. Look, this is a revolutionary document from Trump. He says, I'm less interested in Europe, I'm less interested in the Middle East, and he doesn't say I'm going to put all my attention on Asia, he says I'm going to put my attention on Latin America. He says the idea that the US is the atlas of the world, holding up security everywhere, no longer applies. Allies have got to become primary responsibility for their own security, and he explicitly calls out Australia. And he pairs Australia with Taiwan, which is fascinating because Taiwan is more vulnerable than any other territory in the entire world to Chinese aggression. And he obviously puts Australia in a similar basket. And the document says they must spend more on defence and we will no longer provide absolute security guarantees. In a way, it's quite a disturbing document. He makes very sound, reasonable criticisms of Europe, but he says, I won't criticise Middle East dictatorships because I no longer want to impose democracy. And he utters not a single word of criticism of Russia and barely a word of criticism of China, but then kicks the guts out of Europe, saying it faces civilizational erasure. Well, that's true, probably, that's true. But is it really a national security threat to the United States? And it confuses people about, does he place any value on democracy at all? Now, the bottom line of all this is nations have to do far more for themselves. And of course, we're doing nothing for ourselves.
Well, I reckon perhaps it's a reality check for us. I mean, this lazy idea that we can rely on America always coming to our aid when its relative power in the world is declining, China's is growing. I'm not so sure that we can keep that. I mean, you think of the, this deal that we had, the security pact with India and Japan and all that. Well, India, Narendra Modi, the Prime Minister, has just welcomed his good friend Vladimir Putin, the butcher of Russia, who's supposed to be under an international arrest warrant from Interpol, as an honoured guest in his country. We can't even rely on India.
Well, that's right, Andrew. But I think India is a fascinating case in point. So this document, it has some good things in it. And a lot of what it says is true, of course. But for example, it says that the US is going to need to transform its allies into an economic bloc. And it doesn't mention China by name. It's astoundingly reluctant to say a single critical word about Russia or China. But it says we're going to have to be an economic bloc to provide secure supply chains and fair trade and all the rest. And it says the US can put this together. But the US has, in the last year, imposed insane punitive tariffs on India. And it has driven India into the arms both of Vladimir Putin and of China. And it's punished India, allegedly for buying Russian oil, in a way that it has never punished China for doing so. And in reality, this is because Narendra Modi disagreed with Trump that Trump had solved the India-Pakistan conflict and wouldn't nominate Trump for a Nobel Peace Prize. Now, how do you square the national security strategy's urgent need to have the democracies of the world combining together to form safe security chains and rules of the road for fair trade and all the rest of it, with Trump, on the other hand, just putting on capricious, wild tariffs on everybody, while at the same time saying in this document, big powers have their spheres of influence, which seems to mean Russia can do what it likes in Ukraine, China can ultimately do what it likes in Taiwan, although the document says he's going to maintain deterrence and he opposes any change to the status quo across Taiwan. And most of the document is focused on Latin America, where he wants to be able to attack Venezuela and bomb Mexico and so forth. It's a very, very strange document. Now, I think at the end of the day, the US is still absolutely indispensable to our security. But the idea that you just go along, I mean, the Albanese government is completely impervious to reality. These are massive geostrategic changes coming right now before our eyes, and our closest ally is declaring them, and we're just on autopilot. We're not going to do anything.